Today, we're going to be covering scaling inside Roblox Studio. You are going to learn everything about scaling your GUI inside Studio and making it ready across multiple devices. Specifically, we're going to focus on scaling, two-dimensional positionings, and I will show you everything you need to know, at least up till now. So make sure to check out the Roblox Bible. It's on the link down below in the description. It holds all of the information for today's tutorial in the corresponding tab saying GUI scaling. So one of the big issues with GUI is that we have multiple kind of devices. We've got a big Windows picture for computers, but then we have a phone, a mobile phone that's so much more constrained. Here we got a text label. Let's position it here. And what we can see is that this label is very, very big. It's very visible. Now, if I decrease the size of my screen, we see that the label doesn't get smaller, doesn't change its scaling. So this happens because we have not set the options correctly. So as we decrease the window size, the label remains stable, doesn't change at all. So let's see what we can do. First of all, we need to understand positioning because when you want to put it on smaller devices, you need to position it as well. So the top left corner is the origin point. It's the 0.0. Now, what 0.0 means? Let me explain. So if you go to your text label properties tab, you are going to find this position label here. And for each of these two axes, X, which is left and right, Y, top down, you will see two values. All right. We got scale and offset. So in terms of positioning GUI elements, you need to understand X and Y, the different kind of dimensions. We're talking about two dimensions here because it's a GUI, it's not 3D that has a third dimension. And you need to understand what scale and offset does. So as we can see here, our scale and offset is at 0. If I move the text label, we can see that the scale is changing on the x-axis because I move it left and right. All right. And here, top down changes the y. So the downer you go, the more y is increasing. And we can see here that scale is changing. And usually when you make GUIs, you want the scale setting to be used because scale is happening proportionally, takes into account how big the screen is. So it's relative to how big the screen is. Now, another question is why do we see this value when y is literally touching the because our anchor point is on the top left. This is the default. Okay, so the anchor point is essentially your center of what you're creating. So if you want to make sure that you scale according to the middle of your object, of your scene, you will have to change the anchor point. That's very, very important. And we can see here that the anchor point again has X and Y. And it is 0.0, which denotes the top left corner of our text label. Now, what you can do with anchor points is just go to 0.5 and 0.5, and this will denote now the middle. And you can see a big dot here, a big rectangle at the middle of the text label. So if you now take a look at the positioning as we go up and down, you can see it shifts immediately. We can see here that our X denotes the X of the anchor point. So it's not 0 anymore. Y is again how big it is. So if you put the anchor point just outside the screen, you can see Y becoming bigger than 1. So that's also something very useful you need to understand about positionings. So the first learn is anchor points. The next is positioning. And you always want to be using scale. Now, if you want to use offset, it's going to be fixed pixels. And very important for you to understand is that if you play with offset, you cannot play with scale. If you play with scale, you cannot play with offset. These are either you use one or you use the other. So let's say that we want an offset of 100 pixel on the x-axis and an offset of 200 pixels on the y-axis, or let's do x-axis to 400. Okay, so we can see here that our offset is like that. So even though we, make the screen bigger or smaller, nothing is changing. The position is remaining stable. And that's why we don't want to really use offset, like pretty much never. So if we go to positioning 0. 0.5 and scale 0. 0.5, we can find the middle, especially if we have centered our arc or our anchor point. So as we can see here, our label remains in the middle, even though we decrease the viewport, okay? It still remains in the middle, all right? Of course, it's all about the positioning. Our label is not becoming smaller or bigger because we have not changed its scaling. If we want to do that, we can go and find the exact same settings in terms of the sizing of our window in the size tab over here. Again, we have scale and offset, right? So it's exactly the same settings, it's exactly the same options, and they work exactly the same way. So there is nothing to complicate at this point. It's pretty simple. What I want to show you is that one of the very important things is with like two values. Okay, x has literally two, and this is what we call a udim2 structure. This structure essentially holds two. This scale that is one dimensional, this is udim with two dimensions, and this size that holds two. So let's make our UI scalable. I'm going to put scale 0. 0.5 here and here. So this is our window, and it is as big as you see. Let's say that we want to make it like that. So it's like a side window. We can go ahead and position and scale it here. So as we play around with our monitor, we're going to see it becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and similar like that. You see it? It's changing just because we use the scale option. Now, of course, scale option doesn't always work perfectly because if you've got a very small window, you are going to have an issue. Some people may not be able to click the buttons. So this is something that you need to keep in mind when you are using the scale option. Sometimes using the offset and making the UI as small as possible is also a viable option. So let's do one more thing because I want you to see the UD dimension type. Let's go ahead inside the text label and create a local script. All right, so we got a local script here. And what we're going to do is we are going to say local text label equals script.parent. So what we do here is we access the actual text label because we put the local script inside it. We're going to do a task wait of 3 seconds or maybe 2 seconds. And then we're going to do a print. GUI has changed, right? And what we're going to do is programmatically change the scaling and the position of the GUI. So we're going to do text label dot position equals udim, which is what I was telling you about before. So this represents a two-dimensional value where each dimension is composed of a relative scale and absolute offset. So we write udim new. So this is how we create a new position. And as we can see here on the parameters, you see it. First, we got the scale in the x-axis, then we have the offset, then we have the y scale, and then we have the y offset. And this is how we could programmatically set the position and the size of our labels. Very powerful if you want to programmatically create UIs. So we're going to say 0. 0.5. We're not going to be using the offset in any case. Okay, so we write this thing and then we go to text label.size. Essentially, we positioned it in the middle. What we're going to do is we're going to say udim2. And again, this is exactly the same. We say how big we want it to be. So we're going to go with 25 in both cases, X and Y scale. So now that we have our script, we can go ahead and play the game and let's see what happens to our UI. Our UI is here, boom, repositions. After 2 seconds, we see the GUI has changed message. And now you learned everything about positioning, scaling offset, you learned all about sizes, and you learn how to manipulate all of these things using local scripts inside Roblox Studio using Luau code. Super simple, super amazing. Press the subscribe button, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.